Hello, and welcome to our lecture on the Renaissance and the Reformation. I want to talk to you very briefly today just about some points about the Renaissance and the Protestant Reformation, um, how they are intersected, some of the issues that we see emerging after Europe has been sort of ravaged by the plague, as you all talked about last week. If you look, there are lots of slides on this lecture. I am not going to go over all of this. You are welcome to peruse this PowerPoint in more depth at your leisure, but I do want to just highlight a few things, particularly as you are working on the discussion for this week. So when we think about and again, here we have an example of Italian Renaissance art. This is a landscape of Florence. And these are a couple of things that Renaissance painters are starting to figure out. Point of view, the horizon line, right? Being able to have a sort of foreground, background, middle ground. And you often see in Renaissance art a real depiction of the landscape, what it looks like. And what it looks like in terms of Florence is that Florence is a thriving metropolis, right? Located right on the river, available for commerce. It's a hustling, bustling place. And if you look right here, right, you see someone studying, someone thinking. And I find this very interesting, right? Because the Renaissance, if we look at it in terms of time period, right, it means rebirth, right? What is being rebirthed? Well, Europe has been ravaged by the plague. That's the first thing. And in so doing, people have stopped going to church. This rebirth that's celebrated by the Renaissance is best understood as state-sponsored propaganda, right? This is the church and other powerful forces using art as a way to connect with people. And this is very powerful. And many of the ideas, such as a man thinking alone on the side of a mountain, are the same things that people are prosecuted for by the church, right? For being independent thinkers and the diet of the worms and Martin Luther being excommunicated. So my point is, if you think it is contradictory of the church to celebrate human thought, at the same time, it is physically killing and persecuting people for ideas that threaten the church, you are not alone. I also find it an interesting paradox. So typically in history in early modern Europe, this time period is obviously the Renaissance, very celebrated. I see it less in those sort of exceptional terms. So, my bias is out there. All right. But nonetheless, right? These are characteristics of Italian Renaissance. It's a rediscovering of Greek and Roman philosophers, right? So there's a lot of emphasis on the Greek and Roman period of antiquity. So why is this significant? Because they're also going to repackage ideas about Greece and Rome in their own ideas, and that will also shape ideas about race. There is a sense of trying to find order in the universe after the disruptions caused by the plague and the latter Middle Ages, and you can certainly understand that even by looking around in your own time. But like I said, there's also a focus on things that are secular, so it's a contradictory hodgepodge of themes that we see explored in Renaissance art, right? Renaissance art will also show us a lot of portraiture, a lot of famous people, wealthy people, doing what wealthy people do. So there's also a sort of celebration of wealth that is often left off of these sort of charts, but is very much a theme. All right. So again, I'm not going to really talk about this, but this just sort of shows us some of these shifts that are happening in society, right? Europe is becoming urban. Long distance trade is increasing, so people are connected to China. They're connected to Africa through trade. It's also, we are about to see global trade with transatlantic world. So Um, those are some very fundamental ways that life is shifting, um, and technology is shifting as well, right? And that's also going to have a huge impact. So we really start to see the Renaissance beginning in Italy first, and perhaps it is because of its connection to the outside world through trade that we start to see that in the cities of Florence, again, along the river, that are really changing because of interaction with people from across the world. And in terms of the Renaissance, right, the way Renaissance painting gets made is through the system of patronage, where wealthy families or the church hires artists like Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, others, to paint for them. That is how these works of art are come into play. So you need a wealthy patron, a wealthy donor. People aren't just painting. They have to have access to materials, which are also expensive. So you don't paint unless you have a patron. All right. And the Medici family, again, is really an example of the powerful families that take center stage in the early modern period. The Habsburg family being another, the powerful families of England and France, and Spain. Marriage, of course, is a way to maintain power in families. But the Medici family sort of serve as the example in Italy. And Giovanni de' Medici is the first patron of the arts in the family, and he's commissioning incredible architecture around the city. And then there's Cosimo the Elder, and also Lorenzo the Magnificent, and as you will also talk about, Alessandro de' Medici. So this is sort of just a interesting graphic of how the Medicis are sort of demonstrating their power. Um, these are some of the examples of the style, right? So I don't know what you see when you look at it, but I'm sort of struck by the movement of the garments, right? This seems like people are in motion. There's a great sense of perspective, and it's well sort of designed compositionally. It feels like you sort of understand the chaos of the scene that's going on, and of course, the theme is Christian in scope. It is the anointing of the feet of Jesus by Mary Magdalene right here. It's also interesting to look at the characters, right? If this is a scene about Jesus, he is depicted as what? Well, he looks like a white dude. So the sort of ethnic representation or racial representation is now, through the eyes of these Renaissance painters, are showing historical Jesus as white, right? So it's also something to take from this. In terms of the Renaissance, it's not just painting, of course. There's music, there's poetry, there's literature. So it encompasses a variety of different types of cultural expressions. One of the most notable, of course, is Machiavelli's The Prince. And this really is a application of cutthroat politics. That's the point of The Prince. The ends justify the means in terms of political ambition. If you do dirty things, even if you can justify it to yourself, that's good enough. So these are the types of influential literature that is also produced at the time. And again, these paintings are just so rich. Throughout this, I have listed quiz questions, very similar questions that I will ask you, so you can come back to them to help prepare you for your quiz this week. All right. Now, again, the Renaissance as it unfolds across Northern Europe outside of Italy happens a little bit later. And again, there are other parts of Western Europe that were quite devastated by the plague. So it might take a little bit longer for Renaissance ideas to reach them also. Right, by the time the Renaissance is also hitting other parts of Europe outside of Italy, it comes in contact with the printing press. And printing technology, right, is a game changer in world history. You know, there are some technologies that stand out: nuclear development, the car, the wheel, and the printing press as being transformative for humans. All right. Again, it's hard to underscore just how devastating Europe was by the Black Plague, and then just why the Renaissance then becomes so, I guess, formidable in creating new ideas at the time. And you see certainly this demonstrated in writing such as Shakespeare, who's also a Renaissance writer, Thomas More, who's writing about utopia, right? Utopia as defined by the ideal place to live, a ideal society of equality, basically. And of course, the printing press, which happens in 1456 when Johannes Gutenberg invents the first printing press, allowing for transformations in books, education, ideas, and of course, right, a challenge to religion. All right. So, if we have this new technology that's going to allow for a decimation of ideas, right? A democratization of ideas. And this is not going to be welcomed by the church, right? There is something known as the Reformation of the church that is brought about because the Catholic Church is demonstrating so many levels of corruption, from popes competing with kings for power to popes living lavish lifestyles, and the as I talked about before, other members of the clergy having children and doing all kinds of things with their power that are considered abuses. There are a number of different early reformers that come about before Martin Luther. He is not the only one to see this and to say something. But what happens when you did, right? Many of those who are speaking out are excommunicated from the church. Some are killed. You are dealing in an environment where you are not allowed to speak out. So there are lots of reasons why Martin Luther's protestations against the church are valid. And many people have already done this, although his declarations then become, again, this pivotal moment in world history where protests are growing again against the church. He's far from the only one. There's a full-scale revolt against the Catholic Church across German cities. And it's also, so he's tapping into these broader cries for something else. Martin Luther is going to print, right, on the printing press, 95, what are called the 95 Theses, or all of the reasons, basically, that the Catholic Church is corrupt. He's going to nail them on the door of the church in Germany, in Wittenberg. Among these, right, are the selling of indulgences, the immoral behavior that is demonstrated by the church. And of course, the Pope at the time, Leo X, and the Emperor of the Roman Empire, Charles V, excommunicated Martin Luther, along with other threats to his life. But Martin Luther is saying, right, that salvation can only be achieved through faith and faith alone, that the Bible should be a source of information for all and not just some, that sitting in the front of the church shouldn't mean that you're closer to God. He didn't even agree with 5 of the 7 sacraments. He gains a lot of followers for this, and again ignites this movement known as the Protestant Reformation that will then spawn so many denominations that become highly visible in the colonies of North America, right? From Calvinism, Presbyterianism, Methodism, Baptism, that then develop into their own things. So all of these new sects of Christian Protestant thought have their genesis, obviously, in Martin Luther. Another prominent name is, of course, John Calvin, who also challenges church authority. He lives in Switzerland, and he also contributes to this growing divide of within the Catholic Church. He is going to popularize the idea of predestination, that people are predetermined by God for their outcome. And here you have a nice little visual of the difference between Catholicism, Lutheranism as it is being developed, and Calvinism. So interestingly enough, right, the church in some ways through the Renaissance is embracing ideas of secular thought and the sort of massive reaches of the human mind, while also simultaneously prosecuting people for using their minds. It's a very interesting, complex time. It reminds me a lot of now. And I meant to say this: if you've read anything about the QAnon movement and conspiracies, they also seem like they study early modern Europe a lot, because there are lots of similar ideas. It looks like there than here. But what's bringing about what's known as these scientific ideas? Well, first is coming from trade, right? Chinese ideas that are making their way to Europe, Islamic scientific ideas. So the scientific revolution of Europe is not uniquely European. It is the product of scientific information from China and the Muslim world all intersecting in this moment where there is somewhat of an embrace for learning. There are a number of thinkers, right? Scientific thinkers from Rene Descartes and Francis Bacon, to also understanding planetary science and mathematics. So there's a sort of a array of intellectual ideas from philosophy to astronomy going on. And even the idea of a scientific method that will be sort of the way science is done: stating a problem, gathering evidence, forming an hypothesis, experimentation, analyzing, drawing conclusion, and then publishing your results. Ideas about the body, ideas about anatomy, how you remove organs, right? All of these ideas are really being explored in much more depth. But again, at the same time, it's not as if people wholeheartedly embrace science. That we can see some of the antagonism, certainly between the science and religion currently, and there are lots of striking parallels to this period. All right. I'm going to let you sort of look through this on your own, as I am taking up way too much time. But again, finally, one other thing that's not on here that I'm going to speak about in more depth later is, again, families, right? So these great, powerful families that are emerging, that are intermarrying, that are gaining power even through the arts and through science, are also reshaping the boundaries of not only Europe, but other parts of the world. So we will talk about that in more detail next time. So take a look at this. Let me know if there are any questions, issues, or concerns.